Hello everyone, today we will be solving 9618 Summer 25 Paper 4-2's question number 2. So let's just get started. It says a program stores data in a 1D array of records, hash table. The array has a space for 200 records, so over here we're going to be making a record. Each data item is stored in a specific index of the array that is calculated using an algorithm. The index is calculated from the key field using the formula key mod 200. So basically, whatever data is inside your record or your array, that data basically is used to calculate the position of that data in the array. So basically, the index at which that data should be inside the array or the record is going to be calculated using the data using the formula key mod 200. So I'm assuming there is going to be an attribute inside the record which is called key, and the data inside key is going to be this formula is going to be applied to it, and then we're going to calculate the index at which it will be stored. If two key fields generate the same index, there is a collision. Any records that have a collision are stored in a second array called spare. This array has space for 100 records. When a collision is detected, the record is stored in the next free space in spare. So let's say there are two records that coincidentally had the same index after this calculation was done upon their key fields. So in that case, the first first element that had that key field will be stored into the hash table record. If there is another collision, that will be stored in another array that is called spare. But it will not be stored at like that same index number that we calculated using this formula. It will just be randomly stored in the next free space. Okay, the pseudocode record format is type new record, declare key which is an integer, item 1 which is an integer, and item 2 which is also an integer. Write program code to declare the record type new record. So when we're doing Python, records are not supported in Python, so we just make a class. Okay, so we're just gonna make a class instead. Okay, all right, so let's say it's called new record. Sorry, it's called class new record. All right. Now we have three attributes which are key, item 1 and item 2. So we'll just write it, which are key, item 1 and item 2. And then we write them with the same name. So key, well, all of them are integers. So I'm just gonna write it like this. Okay. All right. Now this is an option for you guys. If you guys want to have your attributes inside your class be private, you can set them to private, but then you would have to make a getter for all of them, which basically means you can making them private, you cannot access them outside the class, right? But since this is a question that is of records and not of oops, it's not required for you guys to have your attributes be private. Okay, so this is like not a necessary feature that you can add, because that would be an extra thing you would have to do. You would have to make the getter. So just don't make them private, so that you can still use it. All right. So this is also an integer, and this is also an integer. All right. Now moving on to the B part, it says write program code to declare the global arrays hash table and spare. So they're global arrays, this is what we know, and they're hash table and spare. I think they've told us the size as well, which is 200 for hash table and 100 for spare. Okay, so we don't need to really initialize it. So for now we can just I don't think we need to initialize it. Yeah, so we can just sort of declare them as global empty arrays. So we have to do that outside the class. So global hash table and global spare, and you can just declare that it's a array. Okay, and spare is also an array. You can say, and in the comments you can write integer array of 200 elements, and this is integer array of 100 elements. All right. Okay. So this was just one mark, so which is why I did not initialize it. Okay, they have a method anyways. An empty record has the integer 1 stored in each field. So basically they're saying that if a record is empty, each of these three fields, which are key, item 1 and item 2, are going to be initialized to -1. The procedure initialize stores an empty record in each element in hash table and spare. So both hash table and spare are initialized using this function, using this procedure called initialize, in which all of the records in both hash table and spare are initialized to -1 in each of the fields. Write program code for initialize. Okay. So we've created our class. Now we're gonna, sorry, we created our record. Now we're going to create um, our procedure. So it's called initialize. I hope I spelled it correctly. Initialize. Okay. Now we have two global variables. We can just copy them over here. Then we're going to say that hash table. Now we can initialize it here, that it has elements of new record where all three key fields, the options that it gives, are initialized to -1 to indicate that it's an empty record, for underscore in range 200. Okay. And spare table, sorry, spare, which is also the same thing but for 200. Okay. You can do it this way. This is one way of doing it, how you normally initialize arrays, but this over here, you're just going to initialize it with an empty record, an object of new record. Okay. But you can also put in a loop of 200 elements for hash table and 100 elements for spare, and you can then append the empty record in it as well. This is one way of doing it, and using a loop is the other way of doing it. All right. Now it says the hash value is calculated from the key field using the formula key mod 200. The function calculate hash takes the key field as a parameter and calculates and returns the hash value for the key field. Write program code for calculate hash. So this is just a function that is going to take the key field as a parameter, which is this attribute key, and it's going to take that as a parameter and calculate the return value, calculate the hash value that we can make from the key field. So they've told us the formula that is key mod 200. Mod in pseudocode, in Python is the percentage symbol. So we just have to calculate the hash value and then return it. Okay, so this is also very easy. It's just 2 marks, so it shouldn't take a lot of time. So it's called, I think, calculate hash, and it takes the key field as a parameter. Then we can just calculate the hash, which is the key, then mod symbol 200, and then we can just return hash. You can also just do this directly without making a variable hash. Okay. All right. Now moving on, it says the procedure insert into hash takes a record type of new record as a parameter. Okay. Uses calculate hash to calculate the hash value for the key field in the record. So we're going to make use of the key field that we're going to get from the new record, which was set as a parameter, and apply calculate hash function over it to calculate the hash value from its key field. Now we have to check if the hash value index, the index with the hash value is basically acting as the index, right? If that index in the hash table currently stores an empty record. If the index stores an empty record, store the parameter in this index. If this index does not store an empty record, store the parameter in spare. You can assume there will always be enough space in spare to store any collision. Write program code for insert into hash. So it's very basic. You take a new record as a parameter, you use its key fields to calculate the hash value. The hash value gives you the index. Using the index, you're gonna first check that if that index is free inside the hash table record. If it is free, you can just directly store the new record over there. If it is not free, then you would have to go into spare and check which sort of next element, or basically array element is basically free, and over there you're just gonna append the new record in case of a collision. Okay, and they've already told us that we can assume that the spare array will always have enough space to store any new records because it already has a space of 100 elements. So I also think that's going to be more than enough for us. So we have to write program code for insert into hash. I don't think it's really difficult. We'll go step by step, and it gives you 6 marks. So as long as you follow the steps of this, you're going to be able to score your marks properly. Okay. Now it says insert into hash. I think this is what it was called. And it takes a new record, we can say, as a parameter. Okay. So the first thing we do is we've taken the new record as parameter. Now we are going to use calculate hash to calculate the hash value. So we can make a variable called hash, and over there we are going to call calculate hash for the key field of the new record. Okay. I did dot key because directly, so it sort of relates to references to this element. Okay. If I was using private attributes, I would have to use the getter for the key attribute. Okay, which is a little long. All right. Now we've done that. Now we're going to check that in the hash table, we can check that if hash table, the index that we got from hash, we can just check from one of the attributes basically. So we can just say that if the key is equal to -1, that would mean that the record is empty. Okay. So if it is empty, we can just directly store it there. So we'll go to hash table, we'll go to hash, and we'll just store the new record over there. Otherwise, we would have to store it into spare. Now in spare, we have to just store it in the next free space. Now what you need to understand is that you cannot just directly append into spare because append has been initialized because spare has been initialized with empty records. So using the append function would basically add a new element at the end of the array because all of the previous elements are already initialized to empty records. So you basically need to run through the entire array to check when you come across an empty record. Okay, so for that we can just we can have an index which is 0, which can be our starting index, and we can have a loop that says that while spare at this index dot key is -1 is not equal to -1, you will do index is equal to index plus 1, which basically means that when you have to go through the entire array of spare. So starting from index number 0, you're going to check one by one if any record is empty. If you come across with an element that is not empty, which key field is not -1, you will move on to the next index. Okay. We're using a while loop because it's supposed to exit the while loop when it come across an index which is empty. All right. We did not use a for loop, but because then otherwise it would be difficult for us to manage which record is empty because for loop works over a count, right? So when we get the index, we will then go to spare at that index, and then we will store the new record over there. Okay, so this is how you can basically have a run through of spare the entire array one by one until you come across an empty record. Okay, so basically when it starts off with index 0, if that is empty, we're going to check if it's empty or not. If it's not empty, if it's the key field is not equal to -1, we can just increment the index and it's going to move on. So whenever it comes across an index which has an empty record, which has the key field which is equal to -1, that indicates that that record is empty, right? So that it gives us the index of the empty record, and we just store the new record over there. Okay, using the key field is just an easier way to figure out if any of your records in hash table or spare are empty or not, because we already know that all three of these elements, key, item 1 and item 2, are going to be initialized to -1, which indicates an empty record. So instead of checking for all of them, we can just use the key field to check. Okay, on to the next part. It says the text file hashdata.txt stores up to 200 rows of data to be stored into the hash table. Okay, so we have a text file called hashdata.txt, and it has 200 rows of basically data that can be stored in the hash table. Each row contains 3 integer numbers separated by commas. Okay. The first number is the key field, the second number is item 1, and the third number is item 2. For example, the first row in the text file contains 646, 12, and 568. The key field is 646, item 1 is 12, and item 2 is 568. So basically it has 200 rows of data in which there are comma separated values, and the first value is going to be the key field, the second value is going to be the item, the third value is going to be the item 2. Okay. So we're basically going to have to separate the values from the commas. Split it, basically use a split function in which we're splitting using the commas, and then we're going to append that probably into our hash table array. Okay, it says the procedure create hash table opens the file hashdata.txt, creates a record for each row of data in the file. So using this information, we're going to split it using the commas, and then we're going to have each item separately. Okay, and then we're going to make a new record using the key field number, then the item 1 number, and then the item 2 number. We make a new record, and then we call insert into hash to insert it into each record. Now insert into hash will automatically see if it's going into the hash table or if it's going into the spare arrays. Okay, so that's not something that we have to do over here. We've already created a record that is going to manage all of this. Okay, so in this procedure, we're basically just going to have to fetch the data from the file and then split it using the commas, and then create a new record, and then we just send it into insert into hash, which is going to see if there's any collision or not, and then store it into either hash table or spare array. Okay, this is 5 marks, so I think it's good to go. All right, now we write it like this. We can write create hash table. Okay, and we do not send any parameter in this. I don't think so. No. Okay. Now, one thing I did not do over here. Okay. Now we have to add the global over here. It's not as important, but it's still good practice to do it. Okay. Now we're going to open the file. Now we're going to say file, we're going to do exception handling. Whenever you open the file, you need to keep in mind your exception handling, which is the try thing, and then you have to just do the except print file not found at the end. Okay, this is just in case your file is not found, or in case there's some problem in opening the file path is not correct. So instead of your program just crashing, it just prints that the file is not found. Okay, now we're opening it. We're going to copy the file path. This is our file. We're going to do get info, and then we copy the file path. Okay, and then the file name is hashdata.txt, and we're opening it for read. Okay, all right. Now first we're going to extract one line one by one, so we can just call the element string. So in the string we can just save each line of the file one by one. Okay, so we're going to read each line. So file.readline.strip. Strip removes any extra space in that line. Okay, now because we can either have a loop of 200, because we know, do we know for, okay, it says stores up to 200 rows of data. So we're not exactly sure if it stores 200 rows exactly or if it's lesser than it. So we can just say, we can just have a loop that runs until the file is not, until the end of file. Okay, so we can say that while the string is not equal to an empty string, which would indicate that there are no more lines in the file, we are going to take the string and we are going to split it using the split function, where our basically the character which we're using to split it is the comma. So now what it's going to do is it's going to split the string. For example, this is the string that is saved inside our string variable when we read the line from the file. Okay, so it's going to split it by those commas. So now we're going to have 3 different items and we can access them as indexes. So basically this is going to be, after you applying the split function, this is going to be at index number 0 in that string. This is going to be at index number 1, the item 1, and item 2 is going to be at index number 2. Once you apply the split function, you can access different elements, or basically the element that you've separated or split using the character, basically in this case a comma. You can access those separated elements using indexes. So it basically, you can say that in a way, just for understanding purposes, that the string converts into an array in which you can access the different items using its indexes. All right. Okay. Now we can create a variable called key, in which we're going to store the first element, which is, because we know that the first element is the key field. Now one thing you need to keep in mind is when you read a line from the file and save it into a variable, it is always going to be saved as a string. Okay, now in our record, all of our elements are integers. So when we have to store it into a record, or when we have to create a record, we need to convert it into integer. So when we do this, we are going to say int. Okay, so it converts it into an integer. Then we have item 1, we can say int, that is the second element, which is at index number 1. Then we have item 2, which is at the third element at index number 2. Okay. Now we are going to create a new record. We can just write it like this. That new record is equal to an item of type an element and a variable of type new record, and if we have to send three parameters or arguments in it, which are key item 1 and item 2. So we'll just send key item 1 and item 2, which we have made over here. Okay. Now we are going to call insert into hash and send the new record over there. Now it is up to insert into hash to see that if it is added into the hash table array or if it is added into the spare array. That is not something that we need to deal with inside this procedure. Alright, now after we're done with this, we're going to read the next line in the file inside the loop, which is, I'll just copy it actually. So the file.readline.strip function basically is executed in order. So what the first time this is run for the same file, it's going to read the first line. The second time this is run, is going to read the second line, and then anytime this line is executed, is going to read the next line. This is the reason why we're doing it inside the loop, is because when we have to read the next line and then we check if that line is not empty. Okay, so if that line was not an empty line, then we're going to move on and do this entire process. Then it reads the next line. In this case, after the loop has run twice, it's going to read the third line, then check that if the line is not empty, which will indicate the end of file. So as long as you do not come across an empty line, this loop is going to continue working, and we're going to keep adding new records into our hash table. Okay, then we're going to say file.close. We're going to close our file, and then we finish the exception handling, which is except print file not found. Okay, so this is our create hash table. Now moving on to the next part, it says the procedure print spare outputs the key field of each element in the array spare that does not contain an empty record. So basically print spare is just used to print all of the key fields of all of the records in the spare array as long as it's not an empty record. So we know that elements in the spare array were filled in the next free space. So we're going to keep printing all of the key fields until we come across an empty one. So when we come across an empty one, which is basically going to be -1, then we're going to stop our loop and we're going to stop printing. Okay, so we do not have to print empty records. We just have to print the ones that are filled in the spare array only. Okay. Okay, so now we're gonna write the print spare. There is no parameter. We can just send the global spare. Okay. Now we can introduce, we can still have a while loop over here. Again, we're not going to use a for loop because we don't have to print all of the elements. We only have to print elements that are full. Okay, so we can start off, we can initialize our index to 0, and we can say that while any element at a certain index that its key field is not equal to -1, it's not equal to -1, we're going to print the key field of that index. Okay, and then we're going to increment index by 1 like this. Okay, so what this is going to do is that it initialized index to 0. Now it's going to, first time the loop runs, it's going to go to index 0, check its key field. If it is not equal to -1, it's going to print it. Then it increments index and moves on to the next index. Okay, so this is going, though all of those key fields are going to be printed as long as we do not come across a key field that is -1. Whenever the loop comes across an index that is -1, it is going to exit the loop, because obviously once you come across an empty record, you already know that all of the records that follow are going to be empty anyways, because in the spare array things are sort of appended in the next free space. All right, so this is the print spare method. It wasn't very difficult, it was just 2 marks. Okay, now it says the main program should call the procedure to initialize the arrays, call the procedure to create the hash table, and then call the procedure to output contents of spare. Write program code for the main program. So we're going to call 3 procedures in our main program. One, the initialize one, then create hash table one, and then the print spare one. So we can say that this is our main program. and we will first call initialize, then we will call create hash table, then we will call print spare. Okay, we did also make another module which was called insert into hash, but that is being used into create hash table, so we don't have to call it separately. Okay, so we've called all three of our modules. Okay, now we're just gonna test it. So we're gonna run it and then hopefully it will work. Okay, so I printed a long list of records, so you can just cross check with the marking scheme. I've cross checked and it starts with 915, 136, 415, and it ends up with 88. So obviously you don't have to cross check each and every number. You can just check the start and the end. If it looks similar, then that would mean your answer is correct. Okay. So this was it with this question. Look forward to more videos from our end. I know CIs are closer, so good luck to you for your CIs. You can always look at our videos and watch our videos if you want to clear concepts of paper 4. And I'm going to be uploading more videos every day almost for new questions. All right. Take care. Goodbye.